we'd like to welcome each and every one of you back to 2-in-1 Ministries today. And this is a couples class in case you have never joined us before. Todd and I had the burden to start this class approximately 6 years ago for one of our Sunday school engaged couples. And he was finishing his PhD in Norway, and that is a little bit about how this class got off the runway. Right now, even though we have studied many different topics in this class, right now we are on a section about marriage. And we are using the book Strike the Original Match, which is written by Chuck Swindoll. This particular chapter talks about termites. And of course, if you have been with us for the past few weeks, you'll realize that we are comparing the physical attributes of a home with material qualities to the spiritual qualities of building your marriage. So getting back to the word termites, something real funny that I want to share with you. It wasn't funny at the time, but when Todd and I first bought this house back in 2000, and by the way, this was the first house we have ever purchased. Prior to that, we were renting. So we bought this house, and it had many different projects to accomplish before we were able to move in. So that period of time from the time we purchased our house to the time we moved in was almost 1 year. So what happened is we were so excited the day we closed on our house. We all came back to the house here with our daughter to celebrate with a pizza from Little Caesars Pizza. So we sat down and we're having so much fun, and we just couldn't wait when we finished eating to get up. And our first project was going to be to tear up the carpet, because the lady we bought the house from told us it had these beautiful shiny hardwood floors, as shiny as a copper penny. So we just couldn't wait to see the beautiful hardwood floors under the carpet. So we finished eating and we started pulling the carpet back. And can you guess what we saw? It was quite a surprise, but it was not the surprise we were looking for. We saw the most horrible orange linoleum in the living room, dining room, and kitchen. So, upon further inspection, we found out that underneath the subflooring, that all this subflooring had been replaced because of termites, former termite damage. And so we were just in for quite a shock, and having to lay down these hardwood floors that you see now, that we purchased from a friend who got them from an old gymnasium. So Todd can tell you a little bit more about that as we go along. But anyway, the name of this chapter is also kind of different. And you might not recognize the second word I'm going to use, or the last word here. It's called Termites in Your Trough. And trough comes from the word betrothed. So Todd is going to unfold the meaning of that to us today. And thank you so much again for joining us. And come along with your Bibles, and let's see what we can do to grow closer marriages, or prevent a divorce, or if you're not married yet and you're looking forward to marriage, I hope that we can give you some helpful tips along the way for your future. Okay, thanks again. And here's our teacher, Todd Frederick.
Along with my co-teacher, Heather Frederick. So we had quite a interesting time with this house, and that's such as like the case as it is, like the analogy that Chuck Swindoll uses for marriages is that it's like a house. You know, you can't just leave a house, buy it, and 50 years later expect it to be just like it was when the builder walked out and you signed the title to it. So you got to do upkeep. You have to watch out for little things that come into the marriage, like this word troth, it actually means faithful. You know, it means fidelity. You know, you don't want to have infidelity in your house, infidelity in your marriage. It means you're just breaking your marriage vows. That'd be like if you decide, well, we got this brand new house, let's just bust out this wall here. You know, that wouldn't be wise, and so you shouldn't be busting out your marriage, you know. Next, you know, you figure it has to do too with honesty. You know, you have to keep honesty in your marriage. You know, sometimes people are secretive about things in their marriage, keep something from their spouse, and find out that, well, now you've got a $200,000 lien on your house because you didn't know it, that you had your spouse had a gambling problem and all that stuff, and you have to be loyal. And that goes back to being faithful. And so these are things that in your troth, or your faithfulness to your spouse, and those type things, you don't want little things coming in there, like wood has an enemy called termite, and also water and fire and those type things. So you want to keep those things out of your marriage. So what we need to do is see that you know, these little, you don't know it that they're happening, but the termites are sitting there eating away at your house. You know, they could be making holes, weakening the structure. You don't really know it, and that's kind of some ways that marriages fail. You know, get to be 10 years, 20, even what they call now gray divorce, where women and men are in their 50s and 60s and they're getting divorced. You're thinking, well, you've been together for 40 years. What's happened? Well, it's then the little termites coming in, eroding away, and so you have these things that, if you look at the biblical example, like Song of Solomon, I think I was going to read that.
Yes.
2:14, it tells about, you know, the man and his love for his wife, and vice versa.
Yes, it says, "O my dove, thou art in the clefts of the rock, in the secret places of the stairs. Let me see thy countenance, or thy face. Let me hear thy voice, for sweet is thy voice, and thy countenance is comely," or nice looking. "Take us the foxes, the little foxes that spoil the vines, for our vines have tender grapes."
And so you have these things that are obvious attractions and things like that, outward appearance, personalities, those type of things that you are moved towards each other when you're like dating or whatnot. When you first meet, you think, wow, that person's got chemistry or whatever. But then before you know it, you get married, and then afterwards you find out that there's issues there that maybe you weren't fully aware of before. You know, love is blind, they say. So, you know, you have little foxes that sometimes, as the proverb says, Solomon says, that spoil the vines. You know, you got to get rid of the foxes. So, in the case of marriage, you got to look out for those little things that seems kind of, you know, probably when you're dating, you're sitting there thinking, oh, you know, this is kind of funny. He's got a funny personality or whatever. She's kind of a Jack Spacey, but I kind of like it or whatever. But then you find out that they got, when they're off their medicine, they're really out there, you know. So some of these things you have to make sure you find out the little foxes, to either A, know how to deal with them if it's after the fact, or B, just kind of walk away from the deal. Like when we knew that she got married, she'd never been married before. She finally got married in her early 50s to this guy who, he had never been married, and he was like in his 50s. He always was the type that went to working for country clubs and stuff like that, so he was kind of used to this, you know, like uppity up style, but he was, you know, like the poor guy, you know, just worked for them. But he had a drinking problem that she didn't know about. In fact, he was the church janitor guy as well. So this all took her off guard, and so after she got married to him, she found out a lot of things about him that she didn't know. He had a lot of termites. So the marriage didn't go well. So you have to take care of this matter of what are the termites that could come into your life, you know. You have to have this as a word of caution. That's one thing too, is being careful, and it's being cautious, you know, being attentive to details, and attentive to support, where support's needed. So we look at this thing here, where it's, if we don't take care of these 5 issues that we're going to talk about, then it's going to create a weakening of your marriage. Just like if you have a mold in your basement, it's going to weaken your supports, your joists, your supports, and all that stuff. And your house is going to start bowing in, and you're going to have a cracked foundation, all these various things. So you have to eliminate those potential structural issues in your marriage. So these are issues like confusion, being too busy in your marriage, being insensitivity, having insensitivity in your marriage, having escapism in your marriage. You find that that's probably a lot of marriages that have that. And then stubbornness. Stubbornness is a big one. So with these 5 termites here, as Chuck Swindoll points them out as being, these issues here could be like eating away at your marriage, and you kind of don't realize it's not like the one big, like if you're at the beach and you got a beach house and you have a tsunami, it comes in and wipes out your beach house, and you know it. If you have some structural damage that's done to, I don't know, like undercurrent that's slowly eating away the foundation to which the house sits on, then you're going to have it leaning, and anyway, things like that. So sometimes these things are so minuscule you don't realize them. But verse 15 in this chapter in
Ephesians 5.
Ephesians 5:15 through chapter 6, verse 9. So it covers a little area there. But Heather's going to read the one in verse 15.
Okay. It says, "See then that ye walk circumspectly." That means knowing what's around you. "Not as fools, but as wise."
Yeah, so these are things that Paul's talking about. We need to be careful. We need to be circumspect. We need to be wise. Circum means like you look in a circle around you. And if you're out in the public, you want to be kind of circumspect, not paranoid, just looking around like some crazy person. But you want to, glance around this way and that way, because you probably all seen some video where somebody's just walking down the street, minding his own business, and some dude will run up behind him and just hit him in the back of the head, and then take off running. The guy falls down to the ground, and sometimes he'll crack his head on the sidewalk, and he dies. So you have to kind of be that way, sort of in your marriage. You're looking this way and that way, not being paranoid, but just being cautious. And so confusion sometimes takes place if you don't do these things. He talks about don't be as unwise, but be as wise in this area of, it's basically protecting your marriage. If your wife or husband has somebody that they're trying to minister to online, and then the person gets so emotionally attached to them that they leave you. We know a lady that did that. She supposedly went to England to meet up with this guy that she was ministering to online, and she wound up divorced her husband, and did she marry him or another guy?
She wound up meeting another guy in Myrtle Beach, and that's the one she married. But she was tempted by this allurement online, spending too much time on social media instead of with her husband. And so, yes, she did become unfaithful with both men, and she did marry the second man out of the two.
Yeah, so things like that happen, and the woman, she should have been cautious. She should have been circumspect. She should have been loyal and being trothed to her husband and that type of thing. So for us to do this, we need to be not like the unwise, but as the wise. And so we're to have a clear, unconfused understanding of our marital responsibilities as is described in the scriptures. So in order to keep from being, confused, we need to have these things under the right understanding of our marriage vows. Um,
I just wanted to throw in a real quick comment here. I don't ever remember my mother wondering if she was a woman or a man, and ever being confused about what a woman was supposed to be in her home, to her husband, and to her children. We never had that kind of confusion in my home. And my dad never wondered if he was supposed to go out and work for the family, and he never wondered if he was a man or a woman. He knew he was the man of the house. He went out and worked uh, 40 hours a week and brought his paycheck home every week and put it on the table and asked my mom to pay the bills with it. So I think that the more society gets away from the Bible and takes their cues from social media, we have become more and more and more confused. And Satan is the author of confusion, as the Bible tells us. But God has come to bring us peace and love and light and unity and salvation. Of course, that's the common denominator that a husband and wife can have that really unifies your marriage, is to both have faith in Jesus and know that when we die, or if the rapture happened right now today, that we would go to heaven to be with Jesus, but to share the love of Jesus together with your husband or your wife is the greatest common denominator that you can have. And I believe it does cut out a lot of this foolish confusion that we're seeing in society today. And now it's definitely been displayed as well in the roles of family members.
yeah, that's what Chuck Swindoll is talking about. He says there's a good deal of confusion today over the roles husband and wives are to live out. Unfortunately, many of these, well, he wrote this book back about 45 years ago, 45 years ago, it was 78, I think it was 79. So, yeah, and many of these things that are hardcore biblical values that families used to hold to, they're gone by the wayside, and you can see that's affected this next generation that's come up. As they have confused roles about gender, whether they be straight heterosexuals, and I got no problem, I'll marry a woman, but then when they get married, then what do? They're confused in their roles, like the woman has to go out and work, the guy says. Well, what's the Bible say? You know, the wives should be keepers at home, and the husband should be out working by the sweat of his face, and those type of things. And then what it does is it presents the right picture role models for the children that are coming up. The woman, she takes care of the children at home, and then you got the little girl that she's pushing a little baby stroller, and the daddy comes home and sees his little boy. He's got a little handsaw. He's going, and he gets a little board out. He's tick tick. You know, he's not sitting there, you know, playing, making crochet and stuff, crocheting a blanket. um, so anyway, all this gender confusion stuff can go back to just plain past generations being disobedient. You know, it started back in the World War One when the women had to go to work because all the men were sent out to war to be killed, fighting a no-win war. So.
And also that idea of like taking women out of the home and putting them in the workplace, that goes back to communism. And if you have not been with us in our class for very long, we did a huge section on communism and where it came from, and how it came into this country around 1910, years before it was allowed to be taught in the universities. So if you want to know more about those details, you can go back and review some of our videos on the book that we did, John A. Stormer book on Death of a Nation is the name of that. And I think you'll find some interesting pointers there that even relate to the family.
Yeah, one of those, the beginning of it was communism, the enemy within. So if you find that one, then just all follow the ones above it. It's about at least a 6-month study, maybe a year. So these are the things that people need to not be confused on, and they are such as secular propaganda. the monogamous permanent relationship is now under attack. Like I said, this was like over 40 years ago, so it's even more under attack with all this alternative lifestyle marriage, and now they have it where they're pushing for the age of consent to be even lower. Of course, then that's it creating more problems. And the average age of a person being married today, I guess this is a heterosexual age, is 32 years of age. So you figure that's probably 15 to 18 years of where a girl's reached her puberty, come to ovulate and stuff like that. So you got 18 years there of good ability to produce children. Let's say if she started at age 18, and then to age 32, why she could have already had a 11-year-old by then. And then by the time she gets to be about 45, then that 11-year-old's now 20 in her 20s. So, but now you have it where if the person doesn't have any children until she's about 33, and then an 11-year-old would be making her 44, and by the time she's got a 20-year-old, she's in her 50s. So it's kind of like, okay, then this makes for a delayed process to which then those eggs that the woman has, by the time she's in her 40s and having babies, they're going to be old, maybe having some kind of bad gene confliction there and come out with maybe what do they call it, mulatto child, not mulatto, mongoloid. Might have the other two, I don't know, but so these are all things that we need to look at. It's like, okay, if we do things like the biblical way, the Bible says the husbands are to love your wives, your wife from your youth. So if you're marrying in your 30s, that's not considered somebody youthful. I mean, like when I was 18, I didn't think somebody who was in their 30s was youthful. I was thinking they're old. And I got to be in my 30s, I was thinking, I'm not old. They're old if they're 40. And so it keeps on going, So the secular propaganda, this attack on marriage as being like one man, one woman for life, no one, can't open up the cistern, so to speak, we talked about last week. A husband and his wife is considered like that's a cistern, like a little holding place for your water. You wouldn't have somebody coming in and dumping their water in yours and somebody else putting their sewage water in your potable water container. You'd want to keep it empty, void of all that other stuff, and have only your stuff in there. So the attack on marriage, they say, well, it's obsolete. It's ancient, and we're in an enlightened environment now, and we need to realize that sexual activity can be to consenting adults. If you want to have 3 in the bed, hey, that's fine, or 5, or but that's secular reasoning. But what the Bible's clear cut about it, he gave Adam 1 wife, and he didn't give him 4. So an onslaught like all these thoughts of additional, marriage partners or no marriage, just shack up and all like that. Those attacks on marriages unsettles rather than solidifies marriage idea.
I was going to say that goes back to Satanism and pagan ideas of like, oh, I'm just free to do anything I feel like doing. Well, that's believing satanic lies. No, we are free, truly free, when we become Christians. We're free from the chains of sin, and we are truly indeed experiencing liberty only when we have Jesus Christ as our Savior, and we know for sure that we're on our way to heaven and we have our sins forgiven. And the freedom comes from the security of the commitment of a marriage with a man and a wife. And it's a covenant with God, and it's a covenant to each other, and it's a covenant that's witnessed by everyone that you've invited to your wedding. and signed by the person. Your marriage certificate is signed by the person that saw you get married. But of course, in Bible times, going back to the meaning of the word betrothal, like as in the days of Joseph and Mary, the betrothal was a very serious time because that was the legally binding part of the marriage. During this engagement period is what we call it today, but in Bible days it was called a betrothal. That wasn't just a promised relationship, but it was legally binding. So they had completed the legally binding part of the marriage at the betrothal. So they were already married, but they just had not completed the coming together, the physical side of the marriage, until usually a year later, after the man would build a home for them to live in. And then he would come and get his bride at the time that the father told him to. And we also have all that documented in our
Jewish traditional wedding compared to the church.
Yes, the Jewish traditional wedding compared to the church and the rapture. So you might want to take a peek at that too. That was a really fun and interesting lesson that we studied.
Yeah, and those are all things that, back when they did all that, I think it'd be less foolishness. A guy would break up with a girl, and he'd go with another girl and break up with her, and because you had to put down money. You'd pay a dowry, which, let's say if you paid $100,000 to this girl's father, said, I'm going to marry your daughter, and you back out, guess what, you're out $100,000. You do that too many times, you can be a pauper pretty quick. So then what they did, they paid the dowry, and then the husband, like Heather was talking about, he'd build a house while he was in this betrothal period. Then he'd get married, move the wife into the house, then he'd have the consummation of the marriage. He'd take her into bed with him and do their thing, But now we got it backwards. The guy takes the girl into his bedroom and does his thing. He doesn't buy a house. He maybe rents an apartment and moves her in, and then never gets married. So everything's reversed. Everything's backwards. Goes back with that point number one there, where it's secular propaganda. Everybody's listening to, building their cues by. But the second point of the confusion is interpersonal relationships. When a couple gets married, they have one main relationship. The husband's obliged only to his wife, and she to him. So basically, that's the way it is. And then when say they have a child, then it's got the father is the husband's obliged to the wife, and then obliged to the son, and then the husband, the wife is obliged to her husband and to the son, and it just keeps multiplying on out. You have another child, and then he's obliged to the wife, the son, and the daughter, and she's to him and the son and the daughter, and you keep going on and on, so you can see where there's confusion can be added in, especially if you get a child that you got to get your shots for school or whatever, and so then one child gets the bad shot, so it's now autistic, so that brings in confusion because of this interpersonal relationship, and the kid's kicking and screaming and disobedient and whatever before he's all right, and quite mindful and stuff. So these are all things that add to this interpersonal relationship issue, and those are like little termites that come in. You got a rebellious child, maybe got a rebellious wife or husband. All of you is rebellious to God, but this primarily is pertaining to Christians, assuming that the husband and wife married are Christians. Now, if you have one spouse is a Christian, the other one's a humanist, or a Buddhist, or something like that, then you got really a ton of termites in there. You can't really undo those, unless one of them converts. That's really getting rid of, not one of them converts. The one that's non-Christian converts to Christianity. Then you got the interpersonal relationship right, because you got the relationship with God and you got the relationship with each other, and they're equal, on God's terms. So that's a big termite that we got to make sure we keep out. Then also immaturity. Back when he wrote this book, the average age was about 18, which people got married. And sometimes, like he mentioned, that there was confusion in marriage because of their maturity. You got a kid that's 17 or 18 getting married, and first of all, they're way down on the poverty level because you don't have, unless he inherited his grandma and grandpa's business, and he's worked with it as he was coming up, and he's got some kind of spoon in his mouth, silver spoon. But he's basically not going to have enough money to take care of him, and he's going to probably have to have her go out and work. And she's a nice looking girl, and she's going to be lured aside by some older guy that works in the company, and he's going to, he's going to be a termite. Uh, so these are all things that you have to make sure that you are mature. But of course, we're not going to all be mature when we get married. Usually, you mature, as he said, after you get married. You're living for yourself. Like I talked about last week, your mom says, "Okay, go clean your room up," and you go in there and you rearrange some dust piles and say, "Okay, I'm all cleaned up." And if you don't ever mature and know to do things right and do things carefully, with this attentiveness to show support for the family and all like that, then when you get up older, the housewife, she's going to have the house look like a dump, and the husband, he's going to be lazy. He just played at home all the time with video games. So you got to have that maturity level to transition from being parented to being a parent and that type of thing.
I would say that part of this maturity comes from following the example that Jesus Christ gives us. I mean, he says, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise." Ants all work together, and so do termites. And they each do their little part. And believe me, they can do a lot of damage in a short amount of time because there's so many of them working together.
Notice the queen doesn't go out and work.
Right.
The queen of the hill, she doesn't go out and work a job. She stays in the home.
Right. And so
even she's smart.
So what I was going to say is that as we surrender our lives to Jesus each day, we can get rid of these selfish desires and come along in your marriage for the good of your home, for the good of your relationship together, and not just be always thinking about yourself and your time and your friends. But no, I mean, those days are over. When you're married, you shouldn't try to live like a single person. And when you're single, you shouldn't try to live like a married person, is what Chuck Swindoll says. And I thought that was a really good point he made in a former chapter. So I just wanted to emphasize that as we get rid of our selfishness, that means we're willing to live by discipline instead of by our feelings. Then we can, even as children come along, we can train them. You make a mess, you clean it up. That's just part of life. That's not punishment. That's part of learning to be responsible. And so I could say more, but I won't.
Yeah, so those are 3 points there. Avoid secular propaganda. Keep the right interpersonal relationship within your family. Sometimes roll with the punches too, because some things you can't help. Let's say if you have a car accident and your child is now has to be tube fed, or something like that. You just can't go and expect things to be like they were. So that one there's got a little room there where you have to do things biblically, and accommodate change the interpersonal relationships and at immaturity levels. That can always change. I mean, don't be a narcissist, don't be a gaslighter, and all like that stuff. Just do for the other person, like the golden rule says. And the second type termite that can ruin marriages is being too busy. This termite surfaces in Paul's exhortation to make the most of our time. He says,
yes, he says in Ephesians 5 verse 16, redeeming the time because the days are evil. So having that right balance with our scheduling.
Yeah, so we're to use what time we have to combat the evil, but don't sit there and just stay focused on it all the time so much. But then also take time to do things that are good. Have outings and like that, and use your outings as teachable moments. Go, wow, look at that beautiful sunset there. And you can point out the creation that God's made. Because the heavens declare the handiwork of God, and so that points to that God exists. People say, well, show me that there's God exists. Well, there's an example. The sun rises. We say it rises, but really it's stationary. But we even use terms like that. And the Earth rotates around. And it's always been the same for all these 6,000 plus years. So if you just take teachable moments like that instead of just being so busy that you rush the kid off to dance class or whatever, your kid off to your son off to I don't know, like soccer class or something. Just don't be so busy and look at what's important in life. Where's what you're putting all this emphasis on going to wind up accomplishing for that child 10 years from now. He might wind up having a dislocated kneecap or something like that, and so he's going to be crippled for the rest of his life. But if you train him up in the ways of the Lord, then he's going to be wise. So don't be so busy to neglect the things that are important. Not all our time is in view here, but rather the time that we can afford to use, we ought to do these things in the proper fashion. Rushing to church, need to just take the time. Don't stay up so late at night. Get up in the morning, get prepared, go to church. Do you have to go to church every day the week's open? Probably not, because then it becomes a burden to go to church. And God says He loves a cheerful giver, and my burden is easy and my yoke is light. And He doesn't want attending church to be a burden. If you have a revival going on in your week, for a week at your church, don't feel like you have to go, because if you do, then you're actually going to regret being there, and your kids can pick up on these little, undercurrents and stuff.
Let me just add in this comment too, sometimes we as parents can be overburdened, and sometimes we tell ourselves, well, it's just easier and it's faster for me to just do all this stuff for my kids. Like fathers, you might think it's just easier for me to cut the grass instead of teaching my son how to cut the grass. But if you teach your son how to cut the grass, in no time, you're going to be able to send him out there to lighten your load. Maybe give him a little bit of allowance, but you're training him for the future. Or maybe teach him how to change a tire on the car or the oil, or start out in these little areas.
Even train the daughter to do that.
Yes, and you can even train your daughters to do that. And then, even when kids are about 2 years old, they can learn how to unload the dishwasher or sweep a floor or something when they're 2 or 3. It's amazing what they can do. And if they can get in trouble, then why don't we turn that energy into something that is useful and profitable and would benefit the whole family and help them today, so that when they become teenagers or an adult, that they are not handicapped in those areas of life skills that they should be learning every day of their growing up years.
And it keeps them from having an entitlement mentality. If the mom and dad's always jumping every time they have, oh, my son just fell. Oh, and you got to do this and that. And say, hey, you pull back and you kind of be as an administrator and you say, hey, here's your list of things to do. I mean, after all, you are staying here, especially if he's like a teen, 15, 16, 17, thinking, okay, my great grandma and grandpa, and their brothers and sisters at that age, they were working a job at the mill, and some of them already out lying about their age, but going out to fight in the war or something like that, So don't give them a chance to sit there and be lazy. Give them a list of things to do, because if they were not in your house, they'd be having to pay for an apartment, doing all this stuff themselves. So many people pay for the trash to be removed. That's the dumbest thing. You gotta, most counties have a trash dump that you can go to and dump your trash there. I mean, it's free. Well, free because your tax you're paying for it, but people pay $70, $80 a month for trash removal. Like, just do it yourself. So, those are all things. Don't have an entitlement mentality thinking that somebody's going to have to come across and do everything for you. Maybe you'll pay them. Maybe expect them to do it for free. But don't be busy about pleasure so much that you're not just taking up some task yourself and doing it. Which leads to the next termite, which is insensitivity. There's a certain balance you gotta have. You can't expect don't tell your 2-year-old, okay, collect up all the trash and take it to the trash dump. That's not being wise, or reasonable. But in verse 17, we hear about this term of termite here.
Yes. So, in verse 17 it says, "Wherefore be ye not unwise, but understanding what the will of the Lord is."
Yeah, so this third termite is a term of being dull or insensitive. The passage Heather referred to as not being unwise. It gives the idea not being thick. Right? Don't be a thick-skulled, or something like that, where nobody can tell you what to do, or that you're not thinking of somebody else's feelings or those type things. It's saying basically to the person that you're around, like in the case of a marriage we're talking about, is you don't care about their feelings. Let's say if you come home from work and if you make your wife go out and work and she comes home, she's had a rough day, she almost had a wreck and all like that, and you just want to sit down and plop up your feet and watch a football game or something, and she's saying, "Honey, I just had a bad day," and so he's like, "Well, tell me later." That's being insensitive. And those type of things, they're wind up being little termites that'll lead your wife to be explaining her feelings to somebody else, that guy, or in some cases a girl, will connect with her and she runs off with either one of them. We know of a guy at the church, this is years ago, his wife left him for another woman. So, I don't know if it's due to him, but there again is probably due to that part 1 on that one that we talked about, secular teaching, the propaganda, the secular reasoning. But so we need to be understanding what the will of the Lord is, and we need to be thinking more what the other person desires than what we are, and so with that we can put our wisdom into practice. God expects us to read the scriptures and apply the knowledge that we have, and if we do that, then we will see the sensitivity involved as being important in our marriage. If you're insensitive to your spouse's looks, what she does, let's say she cooks you a good meal and she's expecting some kudos, and you say, you just belch, and then you go, "Well, thanks," or whatever, she's thinking, "Well, I slaved for an hour to fix this meal," So anyway, encourage one another by not being insensitive. So then the D is escapism. That termite there will create problems for sure. Number 18, verse 18.
Yes, this is a big one. It says, "And be not drunk with wine, wherein is excess." That means Satan can use something like that very quickly to make us feel like we're escaping when really we're getting into more and more trouble and out of control behavior. It says, "But instead of doing that, instead of becoming a drunk, but be filled with the Spirit." So that's in the present tense, that we should have that to be our desire instead. And like we had touched on last week about many times people get off on a tangent of video gaming or pornography, and these are things that most definitely will destroy a marriage, and I might add your own personal life as well.
And a lot of times people do this. It's called, this particular termite is considered the running termite, or it's the running away termite, which, person says, man, I feel like I'm broke. I've got all these problems and stuff like that. I think I'm just going to go out and shop and make myself feel better. Well, you just dug yourself a deeper hole. And those type of things. Or if a guy, like one guy I knew that he had a wife with 5 kids he gave her. And so he told me this. He said, um, I was just bored that day. And so I guess he just decided to escape into his boredom. And he communicated with this girl who was said to be like 14. And he wanted to meet up with her. And he had all the accessories that he was going to need to lie in bed with her. And so when he pulled up to meet the girl, it was a cop, an undercover cop, set him up. He set himself up. And so he got arrested and all that stuff. So now he's on the sex offenders list. So it's things like that. You think, oh, I got this time. See, what am I going to do? Well, you can't just escape into some thing that's not reality. You're married. You got 5 kids. You got to be an example. And if you're going to escape with your wife or something. And if you're too busy, don't say, well, I've been working so hard. Let's we got things to do around the house. Let's just run to the beach. Well, that's escapism.
Yes. One year when our daughter was quite young, Todd just wanted us to be able to do something a little bit different for my birthday. And so he went to a hotel and decorated the room with balloons and different things, and had some food ordered to the room, and we got a babysitter for our daughter, and he surprised me with an overnight stay at a hotel room. So instead of trying to escape in a bad way, you can escape in a good way. No matter how many kids you have, you can either use a family member or a good friend, someone who's very trustworthy, of course, to babysit your kids, and you and your spouse need to get away once in a while and keep on working on the goals of wanting to become closer and closer together in your marriage, so that you won't be tempted with somebody else's spouse.
Yeah, so you have to keep the memorable times observed. Like even now it's November, but last month I met Heather for the first time back in 1988. So I was kind of musing on that the other day and saying, we met this Bible study, 35 years ago. So believe it or not. So yeah, and those are things that you don't need to run into escapism. When we run away from problems, that's when we create problems. So we need to just basically do things God's way. Don't do things that seems right, but that are right, biblically right. So then the next point of the 5th termite would be stubbornness, verses 19 through 21 in Ephesians 5.
It says, speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. So you're encouraging each other in the ways of the Lord there. Giving thanks always for all things unto God and the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. So in that verse we see that we see the Trinity there. And then it says, submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God. So that's also a very important verse in a marriage, to both, when you're both submitting to God, then you're more easily submitting to each other, and then you're not demanding to have things your way. And of course, we know there's many, many, many verses in the Bible that talk about the seriousness of stubbornness, and God likens stubbornness to the sin of idolatry and witchcraft. So that's a very serious thing in God's eyes.
Yeah, and so this business of having a stubborn termite in your life, yeah, that could be devastating, changing your holy wedlock into a unholy deadlock. Um, and so this example here is probably more so the case back in the 70s on into probably 80s, early 80s, somewhere thereabouts. Where like the baby boomers, what they did as they become more secularized and stuff like that, then they weren't so much biblically based in their vow to each other to stay. They just kind of were child based. Some of them would say, like, well, we're just staying together for the sake of the kids. And then undercurrent though of each spouse, like, well, I can't stand you, and I'm just hanging in here because of I have to, and that type of thing. So it winds up not being a harmonious, holy relationship. It's just kind of like a gridlock. They're just kind of wanting their own way. And so what it does, it paints a picture to the kids, compromise and being together without any kind of love and that type of thing. And this termite will say, kind of like this idea: I can't stand you, but I'm not leaving. I'll live with you, but I'll grit my teeth and bear it. Like nowadays they don't do that. They just have gotten to the point where divorce is able to dissolve a marriage so easily as like to say we're incompatible, and the judge writes it off. It's okay, you're divorced. So those are all things that nullifies this picture of the husband is to the wife as Christ is to the church. So if the church can be unseemly and unlovely, and Christ can just simply say we're incompatible, then that's the idea that this earthly marriage is portraying of the heavenly marriage. So.
Right, and if you're just like two ships passing in the night, you're not building your relationship. And if you're just looking at this like I'm in the survival mode, yeah, that might be a little bit better than divorce, but you're losing hope fast. And that's certainly not what God's picture and ideal for marriage is. So you need to ask yourself, where are these attitudes going to take me, and how is my behavior going to affect my children? Because children are watching your every move, and they are watching a pattern of behavior in you. And children are devastated when their parents don't have a close marriage, and even more devastated if the marriage dissolves into a divorce. In fact, I know of many situations where adult children are not even speaking to their parents after a divorce situation, or they're so destroyed by it, they try to block the certain section of their life out of their mind so that they can't even remember it. They're so hurt from it, and they don't know how to deal with it. So I do challenge each one of you couples. Your marriage is something that is definitely worth fighting for, not against each other, but together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so the ability to eliminate this termite, so to speak, is the termite of stubbornness, is to be, as the scripture says in verse 21, be subject one to another in the fear of God. If you subject yourself to the other person, then you're the subservient one, and you're looking at the other person as being the one who is the one in the honorable position. But many people have dyslexia, and so they're saying, I'm the honored one and you're the subject. So then what happens is it creates a pride issue. And then the other person said, I'm not going to bow down to you. Listen here, I worked all day, I did this and that. But what you ought to do is just come in from work and say, honey, I've had a rough day, but anything I can do to help you. And after she falls on the floor and you're sitting there calling EMS, and then she comes back to, then she'll say, oh, yeah, can you help with the kids, or can you help Johnny with his reading assignment, or just pitch in and help. Don't have this narcissistic me first attitude. Think about Christ. He gave himself the ransom gave himself a ransom for many. He didn't expect everybody to ransom for him, kind of like jihadists do. They say, "You'll give your son to die, and he goes to heaven." No, Jesus, he gave himself to die, the Son of God, and he rose again from the dead, so that all of us can go to heaven. So not blow somebody up along with yourself, and they go to hell because they were infidels, and of course that person blew himself up. He's an infidel too, so he goes to hell. So do those things, being subject one to another, to eliminate stubbornness. And of course, that helps eliminate all the rest of these things too: escapism, insensitivity. If you follow the golden rule and do unto others as you have them do unto you, then don't be insensitive. You want somebody to be insensitive to you. Then the third little section here. First was we need a home inspection. Second was the 5 termites, and the third part is the operation of the extermination. Kind of touched on the one there, but then this here says, how do we get rid of these damaging pests? 3 guidelines will help. And these 3 are: A, that you honestly admit their presence. These issues in your life that's causing conflict. Just don't admit it and keep doing it. Like the guy who goes and drinks and he's so drunk and so sick and everything, gets up the next morning, I'll never drink again. Once he's sober, he goes, see him at the bar again. So don't be like that, where you admit your fault and you keep doing it. So admit your problem, identify them, and then admit your struggle with them. And then a lot of times people are willing to help you. Like you sometimes see these court cases online where the person asks the judge for mercy. So I'm truly sorry, I didn't really mean to do this. And the judge will be lenient on them. But you got the guy that won't admit he's wrong, doesn't apologize for what he's done, and all like that, and the judge throws a book at him, So your spouse should be probably willing to have a little sensitivity towards your honesty. And then also to decide how to control these termites. Well, sometimes you don't want to control them. You just want to, you got to cut them and get rid of them. It's like you have stray dogs in your yard. You don't want to control the stray dogs. Put them in a little corner in a little part of your yard and say, okay, nice doggies, and meanwhile they biting your leg off. Now you want to get rid of them. You call the dog pound and get rid of them. So discuss with the spouse all the ways you can think of to control them. In other words, to keep them out, I guess is what he's trying to say. Now, what was it that caused this conflict? Oh yeah, that's right. You compared me to your previous boyfriend or your previous husband. So let's not do that. That's the past. What you did, how he treated you, well, like that. If he treated you mean, if he treated you bad, good, whatever. But that creates a rub between us. So let's not do that. We need to get rid of that termite there, control it that way, or whatever it might be. So you got to get creative to make your marriage work, and then start today. That's the third part. Don't put it off till tomorrow, because maybe the wife is contemplating divorce, and you're thinking in the back of your mind, well, I've gotten by with this. She hasn't busted me yet. And meanwhile, she's got a little black book, and she's kind of like a smoldering, ember that's you thought all the fires put out. So then you go to sleep at the campground, and you go to leave, and then hear about the forest is on fire now because that one little ember got away. So your wife might be sitting there writing this little black book of hurts, not telling you anything. And then the time comes where that's just it. She just blows up, and take care of your problems today. So.
Yes, and now as we end the lesson, Chuck Swindoll always likes for us to reason together at the end of each lesson and say to yourselves, now how can we fix these weaknesses? Like if you had a loose board on the corner of your house, how can we strengthen this corner board so that the side of the house doesn't cave in? What are we going to do? What's our plan? What's our game plan here? So thinking about your marriage as your spiritual house, one of the things that I would like to leave with you is a practical tip, and that is think about what is a weak point in our marriage, and then look up some scripture verses about that characteristic, that weakness in your character, and then memorize some scripture together that is going to assist you and encourage you in that area to think more biblically and Christ-like, so that you can build the loving marriage that God has for each and every one of you couples.
And so in all these areas, such as like that, using the Bible verses, look at verses that would be pertaining to the topics of confusion or being too busy, insensitive to one another. Verses that would pertain to being an escapist, and verses about stubbornness. And just do a cross comparison on that, and then do the antonym of each of those, having a sound mind versus confusion and so forth. And those type of things will help you out with your marriage and your dating relationship if you're looking towards marriage and all like that. But most of all, make sure that you have repented of your sins, called on Christ to save you, being born again, not of flesh, but of the Spirit. And we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that click, the like, and then leave a comment.